The BBC on DRM digital radio.
With shortwave and medium-wave international and regional stations broadcasting on Digital Radio Mondiale, we offer you the best content in sound quality to enjoy.
The BBC and Digital Radio Mondiale. Better radio altogether.
BBC World Service, it's 6 hours GMT. Welcome to Weekend with Julian Warwicker. Coming up, President Trump has voiced his support for arming teachers in schools as a way to help prevent mass shootings. We'll hear from someone who thinks it's a good idea.
The gun bans don't work and armed protection does. That's why the Queen and the crown jewels and all sorts of other things are protected by armed security. It works.
It's been 5 days since suspected Boko Haram militants attacked an all-female school in the northeast of Nigeria. As many as 100 girls are still missing. Their parents say they're waiting for answers. Also, a report on the music of the Turkic peoples, a diverse group of ethnicities that stretch from China to the Black Sea. Plus, we'll have all the latest international sports news. That's all here on Weekend. First, the world news.
Hello, I'm Debbie Russ with the BBC News. Several US companies have cut ties with the National Rifle Association in the wake of last week's Florida shooting, in which 17 people were killed. There's been a mounting online campaign for consumers to boycott firms linked to the powerful gun lobby. Our North America correspondent Peter Bose reports.
The actions of several major companies reflect a growing unease in corporate America with a gun advocacy group that wields considerable political power. A number of firms have ended branding partnerships with the National Rifle Association as a social media campaign against the organisation gains momentum. Enterprise Holdings, which also owns the rental car brands Alamo and National, has said discounts offered to NRA members will end next month. The NRA, which claims to have 5 million members, has not commented on the company's actions.
Donald Trump's former deputy campaign manager Rick Gates has done a deal with investigators probing Russian influence in the 2016 presidential election. Mr. Gates has now admitted lying to the FBI and has pleaded guilty to conspiracy. A BBC correspondent says it appears that in return, other potential charges against Mr. Gates, including bank fraud and money laundering, have been dropped. Senior officials of the International Olympic Committee will today discuss whether to lift the suspension of Russia. Alex Capstick reports.
Russia was told it could regain its Olympic status if the athletes competing in Pyeongchang as neutrals stick to a set of rules governing their behaviour. But as the games wind down, Russians account for 2 of the 4 failed drug tests. Those doping violations will be taken into consideration by the IOC's executive board, which has come under increasing pressure not to lift the suspension. But while it has the power to make a final decision, it may now be left for the full membership to debate the issue when they meet on Sunday, just hours before the closing ceremony.
The US Treasury Secretary has warned those who trade with North Korea that they do so at their own peril. Announcing new sanctions, Steve Mnuchin said he did not rule out the US boarding and inspecting ships supplying the North, and those who evaded the sanctions were being put on notice.
The United States will leverage our economic strength to enforce President Trump's directive that any company that chooses to help North Korea fund its nuclear and ballistic missile programs will not be allowed to do business with anyone in the United States.
The US cloud storage company Dropbox has announced it's seeking to raise $500 million in an initial public offering. Dropbox, based in Silicon Valley, began as a free service to share and store photos, music and other large files. It's previously been valued at $10 billion. World News from the BBC. The Organization of American States has called on Venezuela to postpone snap elections in April. The regional body voted by 19 votes to 6 for the resolution, arguing that the poll would not be credible. Venezuela, supported by its ally Bolivia, accused the OAS of trying to incite anti-government demonstrations. Ecuador's foreign minister says the country's latest efforts to negotiate the release of the WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange from its London embassy have failed. Our America's editor Candace Piet reports.
Ecuador's foreign minister Maria Espinosa said she had suggested mediation to the UK government, but Britain was unwilling to participate. This puts Ecuador in a dilemma. The country has reluctantly hosted Julian Assange in its embassy in London for over 5 years. Last December, Ecuador granted him citizenship, hoping to ask for his diplomatic immunity. That would have allowed Mr. Assange to leave the country and the embassy, but the request was refused.
Elvis Presley's daughter Lisa Marie has filed a $100 million lawsuit against her former business manager, accusing him of leaving her financially ruined. Miss Presley alleges that Barry Siegel squandered her inheritance from her rock and roll star father through his reckless mismanagement and self-serving ambition. In a counter-action, Mr. Siegel blames the loss of the money on her lavish lifestyle and her failure to follow his advice. The lead vocalist on some of the best-known pop hits of the early 1960s, Barbara Alston, has died at the age of 74. Alston, who fronted the all-girl group The Crystals, died last week after contracting flu. Their hits included And Then He Kissed Me and Da-Do Run Run. BBC News.
It's 6 minutes past 6 GMT. Welcome to Weekend from the BBC World Service with me, Julian Warwick. Coming up in this half hour, you'll hear the latest from Nigeria after the suspected kidnapping of more schoolgirls there this week. The global charity sector is in crisis as abuse allegations spread. We'll hear the views of the new head of the World Health Organization. And should Russian athletes be allowed to march in the Winter Olympics closing ceremony under the Russian flag? Well, this Russian whistleblower says no.
This is the most important moment in the history of International Olympic Committee. And if flag will be allowed to appear, it will be the worst decision. Olympics could die.
More of that interview to come. But first to the United States, where several companies, including the car rental firms Hertz and Enterprise Holdings and the computer software company Symantec, have cut ties with the National Rifle Association in the wake of last week's Florida shooting in which 17 people were killed. President Trump has used a speech to conservative activists in Maryland to reiterate his call for some teachers to carry concealed weapons so that they can protect their schools from gun attacks.
This may be 10% or 20% of the population of teachers, etc. It's not all of them, but you would have a lot, and you would tell people that they're inside. And the beauty is it's concealed. Nobody would ever see it unless they needed it. It's concealed. So this crazy man who walked in wouldn't even know who it is that has it. That's good. It's not bad. That's good. And a teacher would have shot the hell out of him before he knew what happened.
Well, the fact that we're still talking about last week's attack is itself a reflection that something this time feels different, and that's being attributed to the students who survived. This week, they've been pressurizing politicians in Florida, like the Republican Governor Rick Scott, and federal officials like President Trump, to do more to curb access to firearms. Among the most prominent student advocates for change has been Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School student David Hogg. His father used to work for the FBI, and when he started speaking out on the issue, conspiracy theories began emerging online that he was a plant put in place by activists to, in part, protect the reputation of the federal law enforcement agency. Well, he's been explaining all to my colleague, Paul Schuster.
People calling me a crisis actor, saying I'm 27, 112 from 2005, saying essentially that I don't exist. What they're really saying, though, is that they've lost faith in America, and that's just sad and depressing. For me, it's actually been really good. Ever since they started attacking me, and my Twitter following has quadrupled, the mass media has been able to cover me even more. I've been able to make my voice heard and clarify my opinions on this stuff. It's been great. In fact, we should probably hire some of these people as advertisers.
What kind of reaction have you had from people to the campaign that you and your fellow students have launched?
Well, some people are actually mad at us because they think that we're trying to regulate guns more. In reality, what we're trying to do is make sure that people aren't endangering themselves and others when they have guns. That's what we're trying to do, because if you're a mentally sane person and you're somebody who has no criminal background, no history of domestic violence, and no history of mental illness, in my opinion, you should be able to get whatever gun you want.
Obviously, a lot of gun rights supporters feel that there's a thin end of the wedge issue, that, you know, if they start banning bump stocks, if they start banning semi-automatic rifles like AR-15s, that the government will be after their pistols next. But you don't buy that.
No, I think this is just reasonable. It'll never be like that, because there's always going to be Republican lawmakers in support of lax gun laws, no matter what. There will be.
What are the plans for Washington next month, and why were they so important to you and some of your fellow students?
Because it gives us a long-term goal to look forward to and for people to keep fighting on for.
How many people do you expect to go to Washington?
Probably a couple million.
Do you think that will make a difference?
I think it will make a difference, because it's going to get people out more during midterms. It's going to get them out more voting. It's going to make them politically active individuals for the rest of their life, and we're going to change the world as a result, because honestly, at this point, like what happened in the Florida legislature a couple of days ago is the result of them thinking that the American public's just going to forget about this. They're trying to make sure that this just blows over and that they get reelected and that people just forget. And due to the name recognition advantage that incumbents have, that's how they plan on getting reelected, but we're not going to let that happen. We're not.
Marjorie Stoneman Douglas high school student David Hogg. So what of suggestions from the president that one way to curb mass shootings at schools would be to arm some teachers? James Urban is from the Buckeye Firearms Association in Ohio, where they run a training camp for armed teachers and teach ways of dealing with a school attack.
We've had many law enforcement come to our class thinking this wasn't going to work, and when they end the class, they say, I totally understand why I know what you're doing. What they're missing is the quality of training that's being provided by our trainers and how it will work with existing protocols in schools and law enforcement.
But these are teachers. These are people who are in school to educate young children. They're not expecting to be armed. They're not wanting to be in some cases, are they?
Oh, you're right. In most cases, the vast majority of school staff want nothing to do with carrying a firearm. And there's nothing wrong with that. This should never be pushed on anyone. This is just for those volunteers who say they are willing and able to do it. If a school's going to authorize it, we want them to have the best training available. That's what this program's about.
So only people who would consider themselves able to do it. But then we get to the actual situation where they might be forced to use that training, don't we? And we've had this situation where the sheriff's deputy on duty at the school in Florida where the shooting took place, faced with the situation that he clearly didn't want to face, didn't do what he was supposed to do. Now, what makes you think a teacher would be different in that situation?
Law enforcement are trained never be in a hurry to die, never go hurrying in. They want their backup. For them, the worst mistake they can make is going too fast and getting shot. For our teachers, as we've seen time and time again, the worst mistake they can make is going too slow and getting one or more of their students shot. Actually, in this particular event, not in everything else, our educators do a better job than our law enforcement.
American high schools, though, are in some cases huge. How would you practically arm teachers in a large school to do anything that you would argue would be effective in this situation?
Even though we have more teachers in a building than administrators, we tend to train more administrators than teachers. So the principal, the superintendent, the football coach, the IT person, the maintenance people really are ones that seem to want to do this program. So we train more of them than teachers. But I also know we have some tiny, petite, female elementary school teachers that no one would ever consider. But like a mama bear, they will do anything to protect their young.
But you're wanting to put more guns in schools at a time when there are movements in the United States saying it's time to do exactly the opposite.
Well, we have tried the gun control, we've tried the restrictions, and it's ended in failure. The locations where we've banned guns, that's where we have our worst murders. And we're saying, let's step back and take a look at the unintended consequences of these policies and realize this is a failed idea. It hasn't worked anywhere it's been tried. On the other hand, letting people defend themselves has worked very well in other parts of society. The gun bans don't work, and armed protection does. That's why the Queen and the crown jewels and all sorts of other things are protected by armed security. It works.
James Irvine from the Buckeye Firearms Association in Ohio. You're with Weekend from the BBC World Service. To Nigeria now, where it's been 5 days since suspected Boko Haram militants attacked an all-female school in the northeast of the country, reviving memories of the Chibok school attack 4 years ago. Today, confusion lingers about the fate of dozens of girls believed to have been abducted by insurgents. Local officials apologized after they claimed to have been misinformed that some of the students had been rescued. Parents of as many as 100 children are still waiting for any information about what happened to their daughters. The parents are furious, feeling once again abandoned by the state, and on Thursday some pelted the governor's car with stones. Well, Stephanie Hegarty is on the line from Lagos. Just bring us up to date, Stephanie, on what exactly happened here.
Well, what everyone agrees on, at least, is that on Monday evening Boko Haram attacked this town, approached the school and entered the school. And it's from there that the accounts started getting confused. We heard on Tuesday that Boko Haram didn't take any students, that they only came for food and supplies. And then later on Wednesday from the state government itself that yes, there had been an abduction, but then, as I said, there had been a rescue. On Thursday they said that the reports of the rescue were false. And that news came to us from the mouth of the parents themselves. It didn't come straight from the state government. The governor had gone to visit to address the parents in the town, and he had said while addressing them that these stories of a rescue, which had come from his own office, were false. And of course the parents were very, very angry. There's also been conflicting lines on just how many children are missing. The state government, the only number that they've put forward is around 50 or dozens, whereas parents and some parents in the parent-teacher meeting who formed a kind of alliance now of parents of missing children have said that they put the figure at 105. Here's one of the mothers that we spoke to yesterday. Here's what she told us.
If I remember that my daughter is not dead, and I don't know what condition she is in now, when I think of the images of the previously abducted Chibok girls, as they appeared shown in the Boko Haram video, I can't stop crying. My tears flow without stopping. I would rather see her dead body brought to me so that we give her a befitting burial, rather than for her to be under the captivity of Boko Haram members.
What of authority figures, Stephanie, government, state figures, what are they saying at this stage?
Well, the state government hasn't spoken since that statement on Thursday where they apologised for the false news of a rescue. But the federal government, although they've been fairly quiet this week, the president said on Wednesday that he was sending a special mission to investigate what happened. Then last night he issued a statement in an effort to reassure people that everything was being done to find these girls. He said the army was in pursuit of them, of the militants, and that there was 24-hour surveillance aircraft monitoring the region. But that's all they've said so far. We had a line from the information minister, who's like the spokesman for the government, and he said that he was saying that Boko Haram are using this as a kind of as publicity, and he was encouraging people not to give them the publicity. But he didn't give us any more information on, one, how many children are missing, and two, what exactly they're doing to find them.
And what does this say about the wider security situation in that part of the country?
Well, clearly it's very insecure. We've been hearing from the army for the past few months that they've had tremendous successes against Boko Haram, that they've seized a lot of weaponry, a lot of equipment. But then we have this attack where the militants come into a town on at least 11 vehicles, possibly up to 14 different vehicles, firing guns, firing explosives. They clearly have a huge amount of firepower still, and that flies in the face of everything the army have been trying to tell us. Of course, it's very difficult for the army to secure every single town and village in the northeast, but you would think a big school like this, up to 1,000 students, when we had the incident of the Chibok girls 4 years ago, which is so high profile, that a school like that might be somewhere that the army would want to secure, would want to give extra security to. But clearly, either they don't have the capacity to do that, or for some reason they're just not capable of it.
Thank you very much, Stephanie Hegarty in Nigeria. The man who exposed the Russian Olympic doping scandal says his country's athletes should not be allowed to parade under their national flag at the closing ceremony of the Pyeongchang Games this weekend. Dr. Grigory Rodchenkov's revelations of state-sponsored doping saw the country banned from the Winter Olympics, but its athletes have been competing as neutrals. The fallout from the testimony forced Dr. Rodchenkov into hiding and in fear of his life. Now, in the United States, he was interviewed at a secret location. This exclusive report is by our sports editor, Dan Rowan.
It's one of sport's greatest scandals. Russian cheating reached its height at the last Winter Games in Sochi. The mastermind, Dr. Grigory Rodchenkov. In 2015, the former head of Moscow's anti-doping lab turned whistleblower, fleeing to the West. Ever since, he's been in FBI witness protection. But we're on the way to meet him. For more than 2 years now, the man at the very heart of Russia's doping scandal has been living in hiding, here somewhere in the United States. Finally, he's agreed to speak to us, but such are the security concerns surrounding him, we've not even been told where we have to go. After hours on the road, we're taken to a location that we're told has to remain a secret, along with Rodchenkov's new identity. If you had not left Russia, where would you be now?
In the tomb, of course.
You'd be dead?
I will be done, yes.
Rodchenkov's role in Russia's remarkable doping program became the subject of an Oscar-nominated film.
Were you the mastermind that cheated the Olympics? Yes.
He said the conspiracy went right to the top and that London 2012 was also targeted. So what does he say to athletes whose games were tainted?
I'm very sorry that your career, your biography was simply broken because of this systematic and widespread cheating which was practiced in Russian national team before London Games. That's why I'm sitting here and telling you truth about what happened that time.
The Russian government says you're lying. You were cheating. It wasn't them, it was you.
Russia is a country of lying and denying, especially in sport. You see situation. I give you documentation. I'm honestly saying I give you only truth.
Despite Russian claims he's part of a Western conspiracy, Rodchenkov's information led to a ban from the Winter Olympics. 168 of the country's athletes competed as neutrals, but they may now be allowed to march under their national flag at the closing ceremony.
This is the most important moment in the history of International Olympic Committee. And if flag will be allowed to appear, it will be the worst decision. Olympics could die.
The Olympic athletes of Russian team.
Only clean Russians were meant to be in Pyeongchang, but the second of its athletes at these games, Nadezhda Sergeyeva, failed a drugs test. Moving forward from sport's biggest crisis is proving no easy task.
That was Dan Rowan reporting. Time for the rest of the sports news now, and it comes from Andy Barwell. Andy.
Thanks, Julian. Well, staying with the Winter Olympics, and 22-year-old Esther Ledecka from the Czech Republic has done something that's never been done before at any Winter Games, winning gold medals in two completely different sports. Today, she has added gold from the women's parallel giant slalom snowboarding to her success earlier in the alpine skiing women's Super G. Now to football, the manager of the English Premier League pacesetters Manchester City has to answer a Football Association charge after displaying a political message. Pep Guardiola has been wearing a yellow ribbon in support of imprisoned Catalan independence leaders. He's ignored two formal warnings about it before. Our reporter Adi Adedoyan has more details.
He said last December that it was a show of support for the Catalan politicians who were jailed during the fight for independence from Spain, and that he was willing to accept whatever punishments came his way. The FA spoke to him about it in December, and he was also given two formal warnings which were ignored. Now, the issue is wearing the ribbon pitchside, which is in breach of FA rules. He is free to wear it elsewhere. It was most recently visible during Monday's FA Cup defeat to Wigan. He has until the 5th of March to respond to the charge.
Well, Guardiola's Manchester City side aren't in Premier League action this weekend. They face Arsenal in the League Cup final at Wembley Stadium. And with Manchester United playing Chelsea also on Sunday, Liverpool have a chance to go second in the Premier League table today. That's if they can beat West Ham United at Anfield. Liverpool boss Jurgen Klopp, though, is warning his team about their latest opponents.
They are, I think, in this kind of form table, the last 15 games, I think they are sixth. Since David Moyes is in, obviously a lot of things change there. They get the results. They ever have a good team. I'm pretty sure that always had a good team, and Arnautovic flying. So it's a real job to do. We are looking forward to 100%, but we know, it's hard.
The Spanish La Liga side Villarreal have suspended their defender Ruben Semedo without pay after he was charged with attempted murder, robbery, assault, illegal detention and possession of illegal weapons and held in custody without bail. Semedo denies the allegations. And in rugby union, France got their first victory in 9 games with a 34 points to 17 victory at home to Italy in the Six Nations Championship. Today, England are away to Scotland. Ireland play Wales.
Andy, thank you very much. Andy Barwell with the sport. The World Health Organization has told the BBC that it's investigating a number of harassment claims within the agency. Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus is calling for greater transparency and says whistleblowers should be protected. He's been speaking to our global health correspondent, Tulip Mazumdar, at a patient safety summit in central London. What was his reaction to the growing scandal across the NGO sector?
It's very shocking, but at the same time this should strengthen our resolve to fight it in a better way.
Clearly this is something that has got people very upset, and people are already withdrawing money from Oxfam and others, and given they are so key to what you do on the ground, are you worried that this is going to impact what you can do for people?
As long as we start instituting radical measures to address it in the future, I think we have to see the other side also. Oxfam, for instance, has done great things. I know it myself. I'm from a developing country, and I can give you many examples where Oxfam had really done incredible things to help the needy.
But that is why this is so troubling, isn't it? Because that trust that was there has now been damaged, possibly without being able to recover from that.
So we have to see the problem properly and address it in a way that we continue to do the good things too. So there should be a balance.
And just to be clear, are you doing a review into WHO practices to make sure that your staff are following strict guidelines protecting vulnerable people on the ground?
That's what I said. We have been doing it, and there is always room for improvement. We identified, even last week when we checked the policy issues, there are some things that we need to improve. The most important thing is commitment to continuous improvement. Make it an open organization, transparent one, prevent things from happening. That's the most important thing. But detect as soon as something wrong happens and take a serious measure. We're doing things differently, as I told you. For instance, for the first time in WHO, the top management, 64% of the top management are women.
Are you investigating any complaints against WHO staff at the moment?
Of course, there are cases that came from 2017 which are under investigation. Most of them are harassment, sexual. I think one case which is still under investigation. The most important thing I said earlier is to have an open organization and to focus on prevention, and also to have mechanisms for early detection and ways to protect whistleblowers, which we have.
8 months into the role, what would you say is the biggest challenge facing global health at the moment?
I think the biggest thing facing global health is the lack of access of about half of the world population to basic health services. And that again linked with our vulnerability to epidemics and pandemics.
And what would you say would be your kind of strongest goal for 2018?
I would still push on health system strengthening and emergency response or health security. These are two sides of the same coin. So let's not go for a quick win, to show some image and so on. Let's go for something which is not sexy, like strong health systems that will be a guarantee to give us health security.
Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, who is the Director General of the World Health Organization, talking there to Tulip Mazumdar. You're listening to Weekend from the BBC World Service. In a moment, I'll introduce you to my two guests who are with me for the rest of the programme. Before that, though, a summary of the latest international news.
This is the BBC World Service, where our look at the generation gap in China continues.
I don't know how to talk to my son because I never talked to my mom.
I want to choose better life, but my parents, they want to just stay like what they are.
Exploring the effects of decades of change.
We are living completely different world.
China's generation gap at bbcworldservice.com/documentaries. You're with the BBC on Digital Radio Mondiale, the only radio system that lets you stay tuned to your favourite stations when crossing regional and national borders.
The BBC on DRM for Europe. Better radio altogether.
It's 6:30 GMT. This is Weekend from the BBC World Service. Still to come, Koreans from different generations reflect on relations between North and South. Gang crime in Melbourne, Australia, and the political argument it's provoking. Plus, you'll hear a guide to Turkic music. That's all here on Weekend with me, Julian Warwicker. Now, a summary of world news.
BBC News with Debbie Russ. Several well-known American companies have cut their ties with the National Rifle Association following the Florida school shootings. There's been a growing campaign on social media for consumers to boycott firms linked to the powerful gun lobby. Investigators scrutinizing Russian influence in the 2016 US presidential election have struck a deal with Donald Trump's former deputy campaign manager. Rick Gates has now admitted lying to the FBI and has pleaded guilty to conspiracy. Senior officials of the International Olympic Committee are due to meet shortly to discuss whether to lift the suspension of Russia. The Russians were told they could regain their Olympic status if their athletes, competing as neutrals at the Winter Games, stuck to a set of rules, but Russian athletes have accounted for 2 of the 4 failed drug tests so far. A suicide bomber has blown himself up in the Afghan capital, Kabul. Officials say at least 1 person was killed and several others injured in the attack in the diplomatic area of the city. Ecuador's foreign minister says the country's latest efforts to negotiate the release of the WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange, from his London embassy have failed. Maria Espinosa said Ecuador's government had suggested mediation to the UK government, but she said Britain was unwilling to participate. The US cloud storage company Dropbox is seeking to raise $500 million in an initial public offering. Dropbox, which has previously been valued at $10 billion, allows users to share and store large files such as photos and music. Elvis Presley's daughter, Lisa Marie, has filed a $100 million lawsuit against her former business manager, accusing him of leaving her financially ruined. Ms. Presley alleges that Barry Siegel squandered her inheritance from her father. In a counter-action, Mr. Siegel blames the loss of the money on her lavish lifestyle. BBC News.
You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Warwicker with Weekend. In a moment, you'll hear from South Korea, where, as the Winter Olympics draw to a close, all eyes are on the diplomatic standoff with the North. Has the diplomacy of the Games actually changed anything? Also ahead, anti-immigrant sentiment in the Australian city of Melbourne. Are politicians there partly to blame? And as traditional Turkic culture experiences a post-Soviet resurgence, all you need to know about the musical traditions stretching from China to Siberia.
One of the most typical group of instruments for the Turkic-speaking world is certainly lutes. These string instruments, they are different in every single part of the Turkic-speaking world. For example, dutar, it's a long-necked plucked lute, which is widely spread in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan.
More of that musical guide to come in this half hour. For the whole of the rest of the programme, there are two guests with me in the studio going to be giving us their personal take on the news and some of the issues we're talking about. Karen von Hippel is here, Director General of the defence think tank RUSI, former Chief of Staff to General John Allen, who was Barack Obama's special presidential envoy for the global coalition to counter so-called Islamic State. And alongside her, Gareth McLean, who's a British writer and journalist. Welcome to both of you.
Good morning.
At this early hour in London. Karen, when you worked for General Allen, I mentioned him as being in charge of coalition efforts to tackle IS. How would you assess those efforts today?
Well, it's a very good question, because I just learned yesterday that the State Department under Rex Tillerson is about to shut down that office. And I think there's a concern by many coalition partners that while the so-called caliphate in Iraq and Syria may be mostly gone, but not fully gone, they will morph, they will move into the cloud, and they will do many other things. And the campaign is certainly not over. And I think many there's something like over 70 coalition partners right now. And I think many of them thought this is actually a system that works, so why dismantle it? We need to work together. We've seen so many attacks in Europe and elsewhere. And without that coordinating body, there is concern that there may be a resurgence, and then everyone will panic and try to recreate something like that.
Because if you shut down an office, the implication is job done.
Well, yeah, it is that. I mean, the argument they're making in the State Department is we have the Bureau of Counterterrorism, and that work can be, subsumed elsewhere. But managing a coalition is a hard job, and that's really what that office was dedicated to do, and it was working. So I don't know, it's just another example of the State Department being hollowed out, basically, at the expense really of U.S. leadership. I mean, we'll probably talk about that a bit later.
Well, I was about to suggest we might return to that theme at some point during the next 2 hours. Gareth, you grew up in Scotland, but have long since relocated to London.
Yes, I'm a Scottish Londoner.
Scottish Londoner. And in terms of the journalism you focus on, where do you do most of your writing, and on what?
In my bedroom, in my pants, normally, eating Jaffa cakes. Well, I used to write mostly about television, media and the arts, and then sort of maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I thought I'll have a go at making that rather than just criticising other people's efforts. So I went to work on Coronation Street, one of Britain's biggest soaps. And I've been writing my own scripts in the last couple of years, so it's quite an interesting sort of transition, that sort of poacher turned gamekeeper, and so late in life.
And writing about television, clearly there was a point where that was a relatively exclusive world. You would read your chosen TV critic and either agree or disagree with them. Now everybody's got a view and they can publish it straight away.
Oh, this is awful, isn't it? No, the democratization of opinion. For me, I always wrote reviews that were the beginning of a conversation. That's how they were in my head. It wasn't the last word on The West Wing or Homeland or whatever. It was to engage people. And I think that the technology has sort of caught up with that impulse. And I think that's a good thing. I think, yes, you could look at sort of journalism generally being de-skilled by the rise of the citizen journalist, but you'll be tilting at windmills next.
Plenty more to come from Karen von Hippel and Gareth McLean, who are with me throughout the programme. If you hear anything from them that provokes you to say something as well, the World Service Facebook page is there for you. The United States is set to announce its largest package of sanctions yet against North Korea, just as South Korea prepares for more talks with officials from Pyongyang. It's the latest diplomatic twist as the international community tries to persuade Kim Jong-un to give up his nuclear weapons. The US President's daughter, Ivanka Trump, has arrived in Seoul, and she will attend the closing ceremony of the Winter Olympics. So too will a delegation from the North. There are no plans for them to meet. But for many who live on the Korean peninsula, this ongoing geopolitical drama could have some very personal consequences, as our correspondent Laura Bicker now reports.
Pyeongchang has become a playground. Tunnels made of snow, slides of ice for children bundled up against the cold. Just a few months ago, some were worried South Korea would be at war. Now its Olympic Games have become a winter wonderland. But the hopes of many in this nation lie outside the sporting arenas. I had dinner with 3 generations of one family, whose lives could be changed by any diplomatic breakthrough. At the age of 17, Lee Myung-jae came from North Korea with his father to sell merchandise. Trapped in the south by war, it's now over 60 years since he's seen his hometown and his 3 sisters.
My
children don't know how I feel. My family from the north never leave my heart. I'm always thinking about how I can help them, and I'm worried that they're going hungry.
He feels that having athletes and cheerleaders from the north here in South Korea offer these divided countries a real chance.
I do feel that this time is different, even if politically we continue fighting and bickering. In the end, we are one people, so we must come together.
But North Korea's nuclear weapons have made this division a global problem. The opening ceremony of the Games provided a chance for talks between the US and North Korea. Kim Jong-un's sister sat behind the US Vice President in the stands, but a planned meeting did not go ahead. This time, the US envoy is the president's daughter, Ivanka Trump.
It is a great honor to be here in South Korea with the US delegation.
North Korea is sending a controversial figure, one of its highest-ranking military generals, Kim Yong-chol, who's alleged to have masterminded the sinking of a South Korean Navy ship in 2010. 46 sailors were killed. It's bound to prompt protests and test the popularity of the president's approach to his neighbours. The Moon administration has already been criticised for doing too much to accommodate North Korea during the Games, especially by those in their 20s and 30s. Lee's 20-year-old grandson, Park Jun-ho, however, believes the Olympic Games has helped the North's image.
When I talked to my friends, they thought the North would just come and go, and it would be a more formal exchange. But watching the joint hockey team play and score together and cheer and hug one another, I think my friends started to change their minds.
The generation who've grown up in South Korea and helped this country recover from the effects of a devastating war are more aware of the dangers of having a neighbour with nuclear weapons. Lee's son is Lee Sang-gil.
Watching the Olympics, I realised the North and South coming together in sports is a good thing. But for our generation, if North Korea becomes denuclearised, I think unification could happen faster.
Both the father and son keep a picture of their sister and aunt in North Korea in the hope that one day they'll be able to cross the border, which sits only a few miles away.
I keep a memo of my aunt's original address in North Korea and a photo of her in my phone. The best scenario is that unification would happen when my father is still alive, and we all meet together as a family.
Not all families in South Korea believe in unification. This one has a very personal Olympic dream, and that doesn't involve a medal or a podium.
Laura Bicker reporting from South Korea. Karen, what's your reading of the diplomacy that's going on here? Because you've got Washington playing the tough approach, Seoul the more emollient one. Is there method in that?
I'm not sure there's method in anything the Trump administration does. And we've seen that since the start. Unfortunately, they vacillate all over the place with North Korea and with other crises. So at one point they say talks with preconditions, another point they say talks without preconditions. The right thing to do is to encourage talks, and certainly one Olympic game where the teams are fused isn't necessarily going to change anything, but these things take a long time, and peace talks are a process.
There is a theory, though, isn't there, and it's a slightly crude way of talking about it, that a bad cop, good cop approach can work.
Yeah, but I don't think they're even thinking that either. I mean, I just think it's happening. So I think what the South Koreans are doing is they're very nervous about Trump's bellicose language, and they really do. This administration in South Korea really does want to change things. It's not clear that the North does, and that's really the unknown.
Gareth, what's in your mind?
Well, this sort of divide and the North Korea kind of frozen in aspect or authoritarianism has just been one of those things that's been going on forever. And so I think it's really interesting that that inertia has sort of been replaced by a sort of frisson of this is exciting. But, you know, to me, this looks like optics rather than a more serious kind of sort of proposition. But more serious propositions start with optics, I think. So it is a process, not an event, and it's ongoing. And I think that as long as we're moving in the right direction, I mean, I think it's interesting what Karen said. I'd like to ask, do you think everybody's basically kind of thinking, well, America is just a non-starter in terms of leading the world until that administration is gone, so we have to kind of get on with things ourselves? Because that might not be a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, that is happening in several places, and you're right, that isn't a bad thing. And I think the South Koreans are basically getting on with it without America. Just like in Israel, I think America's lost its leadership ability by just recognizing Jerusalem as a capital. But it may not be a bad thing for these local actors to try to figure out next steps. It's just this one is so much more complicated because of the nuclear weapons.
Just in our final 30 seconds on this, obviously this has been the Winter Olympics for 2 weeks. Have you watched it avidly? Does it appeal or not?
No. I find sport really boring. Sorry. Especially winter sport.
To like it.
No, I know, but you're supposed to be enthusiastic about these sorts of things, aren't you? No, it looks a bit dangerous.
I love it, actually. I love it.
That's part of the reason I asked.
Yeah.
You did, actually.
Well, I grew up in Alaska, and I love winter sports, and I love watching all of those different sports. Unfortunately, I haven't had enough time to be watching all of it, but I get home at night, and I watch some replays.
You're not worried they're going to hurt themselves?
I do. I worry about that a lot. But I love the ice skating and the cross-country skiing, and I love the snowboard leaps and all of that. It's so much fun.
You've got 2 more days of it.
Yeah.
So sort of eat in what you can. You're listening to Weekend from the BBC World Service. It's 6:45 GMT. We go to Australia now, where some politicians are being accused of racist mischief-making over reports of gangs of young African migrants and refugees running amok in Melbourne. The Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, said the situation was out of control, while community leaders accused him of making inflammatory and inaccurate statements for political gain. And they say the positive contribution that the Sudanese, in this case, make to Australian society is being ignored. From Sydney, Phil Mercer reports.
Fights and violent robberies involving young African migrants have prompted a stern response from Australia's political leaders.
We are very concerned at the growing gang violence in Victoria, in particular in Melbourne.
You know, people are scared to go out to restaurants at the night time because they're followed home by these gangs.
In the state of Victoria, the acting Assistant Police Commissioner Shane Patton said he was worried about escalating rates of crime.
Over December, we've seen a number of separate incidents which have cumulatively given rise to this whole issue of African youth offending. We've had an assault of a police member then occur on Boxing Day in High Point. That was a horrendous assault, to be kicked in the face whilst arresting someone, and then to have a group of African youths gather around them.
A homeowner has spoken after another terrifying wave of gang violence in Melbourne. Her home, you saw this in the news, was ransacked and a visitor was held hostage by a gang of 8 African youths.
Does Victoria have a problem or not with African gang violence?
According to Jason Wood, a federal MP in Melbourne and a former police officer, the answer is most definitely yes.
In some suburbs, I know in Clyde and Clyde North, there's been aggravated burglaries in 1 in 20 homes, which is quite incredible when you think about it. I've had families where African gangs, and we believe it to be the Sudanese, have come back 2 or 3 times and terrorised the one family. The first occasion they kicked the door in at 3 a.m. in the morning.
Official statistics show that 1% of all offenders in Victoria last year was Sudanese born. This migrant community makes up just 0.1% of the state's total population. And while the Sudanese are overrepresented in the crime figures, the number of offences is very small.
We should not be distracted by name-calling, political point-scoring or media sensationalism in trying to sell stories.
Zioni Walker and Fender from the African Australian Communities Leadership Forum believe some politicians and the tabloid press are exaggerating the problem of so-called gang violence.
We finally asked the media to demonstrate more responsible reporting on these difficult issues affecting our community and balance their reporting with the many positive stories that are happening within the African Australian community. A majority of African Australians have great stories to tell about their lives, about the positive contributions they make to Australia.
Stay on your toes. At a gym in Sydney, a basketball club run by a former Sudanese refugee, is helping young Africans stay on the right side of the law.
Basketball for me is a sense of belonging.
Stay low, good, good.
My name is Mayor Chagai. So I'm the head coach and the founder of Savannah Pride basketball program. What happened in Melbourne is not something new, because when I first came to Sydney here in 2006, I straight away heard about horrible thing about us, about migrant being called parasites, sucking the social services, and being called lazy and being called criminals.
Go through all the dynamic stretching from your calf, your quads.
My name is Moniping, age 15. You see in the media it says that, oh, Sudanese boys are doing bad stuff in Melbourne, robbing people, and then they think every Sudanese boy is the same around here. If you do something small, they make it look like, oh, something big. And then we go to the shopping centers and all that, they make it sound like, oh, we're going to steal and all that stuff, but we're not even going to steal, we're just going to buy stuff and leave, that's it.
But many Sudanese mothers, including Sayama Ayup, believe that Australian society has given their children too much freedom, which has eroded traditional family discipline.
Kids, when they run away, they give them housing, you know, housing, and they're all sitting down. Whoever got money, go and get alcohol, get this, and do the naughty stuff in there, because they're just out of our hand. But if they leave us with some other rules, we will discipline them in our own way. We feel like there is a war again here. We want a safe place. Our kids need to get out of this situation.
The Sudanese aren't the only group of migrants to have found life tough in Australia. It can take generations to feel accepted. Just ask the Greeks, the Italians and the Vietnamese. They all endured hardships and discrimination when they first arrived, but are now well-established parts of a successful multicultural country.
Phil Mercer reporting from Melbourne. There's a lot, Gareth, to unpick there. Crime figures, politics, attitudes to minority communities.
Yeah, so let me get this straight. The white Australians are complaining about people coming to their country and taking advantage of it. Okay.
I see the point you're making.
Yes, there is a lot to unpick. I think the key word that came out of that report for me was the word belonging. I think if you arrive in a country and you're treated terribly, there's no incentive to participate meaningfully in that community. You know, and I think being uprooted from your country and go to a brand new place, and then people, you know, want to stick you on an island and not let you into the... It's just, are you surprised if you demonise people? You know, give a dog a bad name and it'll live down to it. It's awful, I think. Yeah. And the strategy works. Those, you know, that bad brown people have come here and are ruining things for us. It works. You know, we have proof of that
in terms of, in terms of the media message that goes out and what people then think as a result.
Because it's fear-based. And, you know, that really appeals to people because people are frightened most of the time. But it speaks to really low sort of base instincts. It's really nasty. It's not even imaginative racism. It's just really nasty, boring racism.
What's your reading of it, Karen?
I mean, this is the same story throughout the world, right, with refugee communities. My parents were refugees, and, you know, typically refugees work harder than others because they probably were pretty entrepreneurial to get to the place in the first place. It's not the case everywhere. And of course, we all say, well, they need to be integrated and idle youth, all of that. It's not so easy always to integrate these communities too. The community leaders need to be involved, but certainly, generally, refugees, migrants enrich the societies in which they join, but it's always a challenge, right? And we're seeing that. Do you remember the over 1 million refugees in Europe a year ago, and we're still seeing fallout in Germany and with populist parties throughout Europe, and you see the fallout in many, many ways.
Interesting final observation that Phil Mercer made as well, with reference to Australia, about Italians, Greeks.
Sure, but it's sort of like, it's been difficult for them. It's like, well, who made it difficult for them? That doesn't happen in a vacuum.
And they're white also, and it's always easier to integrate in a white society also.
And I think that sort of place of third culture kids who don't belong in their original culture, who feel they don't belong in a new culture, you know, we don't hear enough of those stories to fully understand what that is like.
A reminder of our main news. Several well-known American companies say they're cutting ties with the pro-gun lobby's mouthpiece, the National Rifle Association, following the Florida shootings. And a former senior advisor to President Trump, Rick Gates, has pleaded guilty to conspiracy and lying to investigators. And you'll hear more about that in the next quarter of an hour or so. Now, Turkic Soundscapes. That is the title of a new book by folk music historian Razia Sultanova. And we're talking not just about Turkish music here, but also about music from diverse ethnic groups dispersed across Eurasia, from China and Siberia, all the way to the Black Sea and the Caspian. Among them are Azeris, Uzbeks, Uyghurs, Tatars, Kazakhs, and many others. Now, most of these communities have spent centuries as ethnic minorities under either Russian or Chinese rule. During communist purges, they struggled to keep their musical traditions alive. But with the collapse of the Soviet Union, traditional Turkic musical genres are slowly being revived, and they're even blending with modern rhythms. Here is Razia Sultanova with her brief guide to Turkic music.
Turkic tribes were living in Siberia for millennia. From there, we can hear shamanic voices, we can hear instruments typical for nomadic people, or from court culture, from agricultural people, settled populations of Central Asia and Caucasus. Music, it's really something which unites them. The most typical group of instruments for the Turkic-speaking world is certainly lutes. These lutes, string instruments, they are different in every single part of the Turkic-speaking world. For example, dutar, it's an instrument, a long-necked plucked lute, which is widely spread in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. Another group of string instruments is certainly spike fiddles, called either kemancha or gidjak. They are very popular for different entertaining events being performed by the northern Afghani people, which are the same origin as Central Asian people in the very northern provinces like Tahar. Drums are also typical for the Turkic-speaking world because each drum, each pulsation of drum stroke has a different meaning for the Turkic-speaking people. And drums are still one of the main instruments for female communities because usually in general for female communities all instruments performance were banned because it's an Islamic area, particularly in Central Asia and Afghanistan. Mugam is one of the main genre of music, a crown of Azerbaijani music, but mugam in the form of maqam or makom is also the main genre of music of Central Asia. It's a declaration of divine love, so love to God, which was rejected by the Soviet regime, and that was not only difficult to perform, but it was forbidden to study maqam, mugam or makom forms until the death of Stalin, 1953. One of the new genre of the contemporary Turkic-speaking world could be identified as ethno-folk, using traditional instruments such as dombra, kılkabuz, which is Juf's harp, and drums in the rhythms of contemporary pop music or hip-hop. And it produces a strong image of the fresh revival of their traditional cultures, of their original roots.
Razia Sultanova with her guide to Turkic music, which is on the rise, as she was saying. And I guess, Gareth, it's one of those situations where, as a political situation changes, there is greater freedom, and those cultures which may have been suppressed previously can flourish.
Oh, no, it's a lovely story, because I think you can kind of hear in that music, if you listen very carefully, sort of echoes of folk music from all over the world. And I think it's that weird thing where there are two things to take from it. One, if you want to destroy or subjugate a culture, a people, start with their language and then their culture, and it falls apart. And the other thing is that it's our difference that makes us the same.
Gareth McLean with me, and Karen von Hippel as well. You're with Weekend from the BBC World Service.
This is the BBC World Service.
The Real Story is the new name for NewsHour Extra. I'm the BBC's Carrie Gracie, and every week I'll be joined by a panel of international experts to discuss and debate one issue that's making the headlines. We make sense of the story behind the news story and why it matters.
The Real Story at bbcworldservice.com. Listen to the world's radio station and get extra information and excellent sound. This is the BBC World Service on Digital Radio Mondiale, the future of radio in the digital age.
The BBC and Digital Radio Mondiale.